This is the meat of what we're kind of talking about here. If you can get your head around visual subtext, this is really going to help you in terms of understanding how to create meaning in your films. There we go, communicating meaning. So what we're going to do is to learn about thinking poetically, discuss some ideas around applied media aesthetics, which is a big subject, but we'll just touch on that briefly. What is visual subtext, subtext levels, the core elements of visual subtext, theme of visual subtext, and then some subtext sources. So this is all great. Thank you for all this. But where do I go to get ideas for creating subtext? And we'll discuss that at the end. Here's a quote I like. Symbolic language is one foreign language each one of us must learn, by Eric Fromm. What is nice about being a filmmaker and thinking about it as a means of telling stories through symbolic language is it never ends. It's not just learning one technique and then you're done. You can learn to develop your voice through using this approach, and I just think it's a really, really nice way to work. And also it will make your work stand out, because people won't quite be able to work out why your film's got a bit more weight to it than someone else's, but this is what will be giving it that weight, hopefully. So what we're talking about is thinking poetically. Poetic thinking emphasizes creativity and intuition using symbolism and metaphor to explore complex ideas and emotions. So that's what we're doing. It's a mix of two things we're doing here. So on one level, there is a degree of like looking at the minutiae and basically going and thinking analytically, but then there's also stepping back and thinking in terms of the poetry of it as well. Okay, so you're using both sides of your brain. They're the sort of the narrow and the wide. So, unlike analytical thinking, which prioritizes clarity and structure, poetic thinking embraces ambiguity and aesthetics. So we're not talking this equals that. We're talking about connections. Okay, so things that connect to other things. You know, you got something and there's a sense of it. I don't know about you, but when I'm coming up with ideas, I get something and it feels like it's a seed, and there's like, oh, this has got something to it. I'm going to go and explore that a bit more. There's a physicist called David Bohm who, there's a book where he's chatting to a guy called Krishnamurti, and they talk about this thing called implicit and explicit order, which I really, really like. And implicit means it's like everything is crushed down inside, and so it's implicit, it's all within it, so it's like a seed. And explicit is when it kind of opens up. And so when you get these ideas, they're kind of, there's weight to them, and you explore them, and it's going ping, 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 and you go, okay, I can tie all those things together, and that will then be part of my story for the film. Does that make sense? And these are handy ways of getting your head around sort of thinking about it. This approach uncovers deeper meanings and connections through imaginative, non-linear methods, offering a nuanced understanding of experiences and concepts. So pretty images are not enough, okay? And it's getting worse and worse, because even though when I first started teaching this, it was pre-Midjourney, and but it's and as I said, I'm neutral on that. But now the sheer amount of content that's coming out that looks amazing but doesn't have any meaning to it is the thing. So if you can create stuff that has meaning, that's what's going to stand out. Okay, that's what's going to stand out. And not just on the sense of just in terms of like the sea of imagery we're kind of making our way through at the moment, but also just the fact that the democratization of technology, where, you know, 20 odd years ago when we weren't shooting digitally, if you made a short film, you would stand out because it was so expensive to do. And now the problem is you're making a short film, for example, amongst hundreds and hundreds of others. So if you submit to a festival, they're going to have thousands of films submitted, and so your work has got to stand out there. And that is still the best route to get noticed, is to go through the festival circuit. That's another discussion. So audiences want meaning. That's what people want. That's what we want. We don't just want pretty images. We want meaning in our lives, and we look to the culture to give us meaning in our lives. Okay. So when you see a film, and I assume you all love films because you're here, when you see a film that really resonates with you, that means something to you, okay? That communicates, and this is what we want to do. We want to try and say stuff that communicates to other people. Another quote from Orson Welles on a similar line: a film is never really good unless the camera is an eye in the head of a poet. He could have written that better, but there we go. You get the intention, is to think poetically, okay? And be playful with it. So we'll start with applied media aesthetics. Now applied media aesthetics is not necessarily talking about visual subtext, but we're talking about the almost immediate impression we get from visual, predominantly visual elements. Okay. Now, what you need to learn to do, because we're all experts at watching, we've grown up with it, we have to step back and be able to pick that apart and try to work out what's going on. So even if you're not in the process of creating great works of art, you are nevertheless constantly engaged in myriad aesthetic activities that require perceptual sensitivity and judgment. So we live in a culture that's very rich with imagery. It's going on all the time, and we're making all these assessments. You know, that's what advertising is based on, is using that to more or less effective ways. Ordinary life experiences may be full of wonder, but they are not art. Art is what we do with those experiences and how we translate them. The critical factor is you, the artist. So we're looking at this image here. How does that make you feel? Anyone?
Confused.
Confused. There's no right or wrong. Confused is good. Nervous? Anyone else? Sad? Happy? Good. All right. All the answers are right, okay? What about this one?
Happy.
Heavy. Sorry?
Happier.
Happier?
Muddled.
Muddled?
Chaotic.
Chaotic? Cool. What about this one? Calm. Anxious, interesting. Sorry? On edge. It's interesting. You would kind of think that that might make you more on edge, but that makes you more. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that makes me more anxious than the other one. It's crazy.
And what about this one?
Light, happy, dreamy.
Dreamy. Cool. So we're talking about abstract images here that have no representation in them. There's a slight degree of representation here, I suppose, but we are having a reaction to those. And so you have to step back and go, well, what reaction am I having to these? And these are elements that you can then use to sort of build your visual language. Does that make sense? And this is what aesthetics is about the immediate reaction that we're getting to pure form. Okay? And we will discuss, like later on as we go into visual subtext, we're going to be talking about elements of graphic design, which is to do with form, but how you can use them as a filmmaker. So, visual subtext. Visual subtext refers to the filmmaker's use of mise-en-scène and cinematography to infuse the film with deeper meaning. This subtext can operate at various levels: character, shot, scene, or thematically throughout the entire film. Again, a bit of repetition, but I'm just reinforcing things here. It helps the audience grasp the story more effectively. It conveys emotion to the audience. It communicates ideas that words alone cannot express. It's a language. That's the way to think about it, which is going back to David Lynch. When people say, what's your film about? He's very reluctant to discuss that because he literally sees the film itself as a form of language. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. The problem is it's difficult to get finance doing that. You know, so you have to be doing all the, I've got to write my log line and all the rest of the stuff just to get the money. That's the problem. So it provides the viewer with a sense of meaning from the experience, and that's what we're trying to do here. And I think not just the spectator or the viewer, but also you as a filmmaker. You know, this is the reward for you. Like when I said when I was first looking into this subject matter, I was really frustrated. And I'd made loads of short films, but it just wasn't. They were just paper thin. I couldn't work out how to get towards, you know, what I wanted to get towards, which is where I saw all the filmmakers that were influencing me, what they were managing to do. And this is what this stuff hopefully does. It's about creating that visual language. So here are the levels we have. On the surface, we have our plot. Plot's a general way of explaining it. When we talked about the conscious and the subconscious, the plot is on the surface here. And underneath, we have these other elements such as tone and mood, illustration, emotion, character, and theme and message. I'm going to go through these one at a time as well here. So in terms of tone and mood, the plot of a film can make us think about a story. It's how it's the discussion we're having in our heads as we're watching a film to make sense of what's happening when and the logistics of the filmmaking as we're doing it. Whereas the visual subtext helps us to feel about a story. This subconsciously puts us in the story. So you need to consciously decide on the tone and the mood. So what do I want people to feel in this film? What do I want people to feel when they walk away from it? What do I want them to feel at specific scenes? Okay? That's what we want to do. One thing which I may have in a slide later on, but I think it's really, really important to mention, is that when you are creating your film, the temptation can be, I've got my script, as I'm reading this script, I'm having all these emotional reactions to this script, I'm seeing all this imagery in my head, I'm writing down that imagery, I'm going to go out and film it. You go out and film it, doesn't have the same effect that you had when you read the script. Does anyone know why that is? It's because when you're reading a script, you're connected to your own emotions. Your emotions are reacting to the script. You can't take your emotions and put them into every single person that they're going to have when they're reading the script. So even though those images are creating that for you, doesn't mean to say that someone else seeing that image is going to have that same emotion. So you need to use the visuals you're using to create the emotions you're feeling. Does that make sense? So the error people run into is they go, wow, when I read that, I saw this shot and that was really effective for me. You have to step back from it a little bit and go, yeah, but is that really communicating the emotion I felt at that moment? And that's what you need to do. So the tools we're doing here is talking about how you can create those emotions. We get very, very stuck to our own images when we read a script. Go, no, I want it to be that way because it felt that way to me. It doesn't mean to say you have to disregard it. You may need to just tweak it, or it may even work. But you need to step back from it and critically deconstruct it and say, well, is this the most effective way of doing this? Okay. Similarly, when people look at other people's films and they go, that shot in that film, and anyone who follows Tarantino seems to be really bad at doing this, they'll take a shot that he's already borrowed from somewhere else, and then they'll put it in their film and they'll go, well, why does my film not any good because I copied that exact shot? It's like, well, that shot was in that film. You know, and that film had everything leading up to it that made that shot the right place to be where it was. You can't just take it and drop it in your film and expect it to have the same meaning. Okay, so those are two connected things there. You need to build the language for your own individual film. Illustration. So the idea is to illustrate the story visually, show, don't tell. So on the left here, we have a shot here with someone with a bare foot on the ground. Now that image is telling us a lot of things in a very quick way. Okay, that if you was to have two people in a room talking to each other, one, it would be dull to do and it would take longer to do, whereas actually having an image to communicate that message gets it across like that, and it also gets it across emotionally. We viscerally feel it when we see a bare scratched foot on the ground. What's it telling us when you look at a bare foot like that on a bare ground? What sense do you get from it? Sorry? Running away.
From danger.
Vulnerability, danger. Sorry? Poverty. How does it make you feel? Do you feel safe?
No.
No.
Safe, anxious,
Yeah.
fearful.
So a shot like that is getting your audience to right into that place you want them to be immediately. Okay? Now the shot on the right there between two characters, say you got two characters in a film and it is actually from another, there is a specific film that shot is kind of inspired by. Say that's a mother and daughter in a very early on in a film. What's that telling us about those characters?
Like maybe they're experiencing grief.
They could be experiencing grief,
Yeah, sadness.
sadness.
I think there's a closeness there as well.
There's a closeness there as well. I think, yeah, there's a closeness. They're facing each other, like graphically. Thinking about it graphically, they're facing each other. What else is going on with the daughter on the left?
The mother's taking care of the daughter. She's worried about her.
Okay, but what's the daughter doing?
She's sleeping.
What else is she doing?
Protecting herself.
She's blocking her.
Oh.
Little things like that can really be used to signify things in your film. Okay, it's detail. Yeah. When you're as a director, you're there and you're directing scenes like this. There's got to be a reason for that. You know, you've got to try to make sense of why these things are happening. Okay, this to me is a really lovely image because what it's showing is what's really rich, which you want to get to as a filmmaker, is levels, and levels can often come about through paradoxes and conflict and things like this. So they're connected, but there's an element of a barrier between them they're creating, and that is pretty much the nature of the film. You know, this is basically inspired by Lady Bird. There's a shot very similar to that in there, and it's about that kind of that relationship between the mother and the daughter, and the you know, love mixed with also wanting to sort of separate as well. Does that make sense? So that's how you can communicate things very, very quickly. You could have spent 10 minutes in a film showing that relationship and an argument in the kitchen and all the rest of it. And we've seen it a billion times. And in fact, you know, having taught students, they'll often like to go talkie because it's easy to do talkie. And then it's like, oh, it's another one of these films where it's just people talking to each other and having arguments in the kitchen. Whereas that communicates it straight away, like that. And people are engaged because there's two things there. One is that visually we're pulled in straight away. It's a rich frame. There's a rich story going on there. And secondly, we have to do some work. We're not being told everything through an argument on screen. We have to try and do some work to work it out. And what your audience wants, as I mentioned earlier, is questions and not answers. Okay? So emotion, we want to communicate emotion. So this shot on the left here, does anyone know what film that might be a reference to? Jurassic Park. Does anyone know what happens in that particular moment in the film?
Yeah, the velociraptor. She sees the velociraptor turning up.
Yeah.
She's scared.
And how do we know she's scared?
She's shaking the jellies.
The jelly shaking. It's fantastic. It's a visual, external representation of her internal fear is the jelly wobbling, isn't it? And it's just, I mean, Spielberg's, you know, he's a genius. He's so good at what he does, people don't rate him. You know, that's the problem with Spielberg. So it's a really, really nice way of communicating those things. So these are the things we talk about. So it's ways emotion can communicate through the visuals on screen. Now, the one on the right there, how does that make you feel? Lonely? Cold? Isolated. What about the building?
Claustrophobic.
Claustrophobic? Austere?
Not welcoming.
Not welcoming? Yeah. All of those things. But you see, it's not just one thing. It's basically this poetic kind of mix of all those things that are all pointing in the same direction, but they're representing it there. And it can be everything within this. So as you go more into it and you think about camera, it's where you place your camera. It's how you frame the shot. It could be, why is this side free? Do you know what I mean? These are all things that you can think about at the pre-production stage because you've got the time and it's not costing you much money to do that there. Okay. When it comes to working with the DOP, I'll talk about that a bit later on this afternoon as well, because what will usually happen is you'll come up with your shots, they'll come up with their shots, then you'll get together and you'll hash it out there. And a good DOP will understand this kind of language as well. But as a director, this is what you're doing. You know, it's not just about directing performances, you're also understanding the language of your film, and that's what you're trying to communicate. So cinema is an inherently emotional art form, and audiences want to feel moved. But be careful, they don't want to feel deliberately manipulated. Okay, and that goes back to trying to avoid cliche symbolism. We'll get back, that will repeat as we go on. Every element of a scene can convey a character's emotion and convey that subliminally to the spectator. So you can go places. I lived in Amsterdam for a little bit, and we did a short film out there, and they had a government building. And I wanted to do like this Soylent Green style thing. So I just got loads of people dressed in black and white clothes and just line up outside this government building. But I used the building because it was perfect for it. And it was, you know, use those spaces to represent what's going on for your story. Character. Subtext expresses your character's journey. It conveys where they are, where they've been and where they're going. It conveys their interior life, what they feel, what they're thinking, and what they aren't admitting to themselves. So there's different layers with characters, and we'll return to that as well. When we talk about dramatic irony later, I'll talk about characters there. So what you're doing with your subtext is you're communicating there's different layers to it. So you're communicating your theme. So what's your message of your film that you want to get across? You're communicating emotion. How do you want your audience to feel at different stages? And then you're also communicating your character journey. And all of these things are sort of underneath the surface, and they interlink, okay? So going to the theme again, perhaps most strongly, subtext can be used to reinforce the theme of your film or message throughout. This rewards the spectator by giving them a sense of meaning. So when you watch a film, and you know, we all do it all the time. Sometimes you want a big popcorn film, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes people can make popcorn films that mean something, like Dune or Inception or something like that. And they should be judged according to the genre that they are, not compared against an art house film. You can't cross-compare the two. But what you should be doing with the theme is to find those spaces, and you can effectively do what's called a theme pass. So as you're doing your pre-production, and you're doing, because there's so many different elements you have to look through, like from your, what is my character development in this scene? What's their wants and their needs? You know, what's this character trying to get at this point? You've got to do all that work as well. But in one of your passes, you'll do a theme pass. So you'll go through it and go, okay, what's my theme? How can I tighten these shots or change these shots to reinforce this theme message throughout here? Be careful. If your visual subtext is too cliche, obvious, or manipulative, you will lose your audience. Okay, and this is why I said it's always good to have a feedback loop. So here's a couple of examples. Sitting up, waking from a nightmare. How many times have we seen that? Has anyone actually sat up when having a nightmare? Okay. Again, you can if you're in a horror genre, you could basically play around with that, or if you're in a more likely a comedy, you could play around with that. And then this is my bête noire: rain and umbrella at funerals. It just drives me mad that it's like, oh, of course there got to be rain and funerals at rain and umbrellas at a funeral. It's just cliche. It's just done to death. It doesn't have the emotional impact that you want it to have. And when I'm watching a program on TV or something, and as soon as I get to that scene, I'm like, oh God, I've got to sit through this now, and I've seen it a million times before. Okay. It's interesting when you watch some drama, and particularly dramas on television, because obviously they've often got a lot more padding, so they have room to sort of feel this sort of things. There's certain scenes you got to, it's like as soon as a character injures themselves, you're like, oh no, I've got to watch this person limping for 2 hours. And it's like, and then there are certain stages that you have to communicate. So say someone does lose someone in a film, they've got to go through some kind of grief process, but we've seen it so many times. How do you quickly get through that? And that's a challenge, but that can be interestingly done. This is a big one. This is one I'm very, very strong on, and especially with like the degree students I was teaching. No one likes being lectured at. Okay, you could be very passionate about your ideas, but you've got to provoke questions, not answers. It's just about being smart. You can get across your ideas and how you feel about stuff. We're all passionate. That's what you're trying to do. But you're not lecturing people, okay? The stuff that works well does not lecture people. You let people get to what they think is their decision, but it's actually yours. You put it in the film. Does that make sense? It's also not a riddle. So visual subtext is not a riddle to be solved. So Easter eggs are good, and I think it's great fun to do. I'm a big fan of Mike Flanagan, who did Midnight Mass, and he also did the one before, the Haunting Hill House. Yeah, he put in that, and it was afterwards that there were ghosts in the background of shots, but you couldn't see them, and it's only done as an Easter egg. And people did a YouTube video showing all these shots where all these ghosts were. That's very rewarding to do, but he didn't just do that. He had other stuff going on in there as well. It's not, again, it's a riddle to be solved, so it's not like it has one answer. That's the other thing to avoid. So, subtext must relate to the story. Random symbolism unrelated to story holds no meaning. We discussed that earlier on. Think poetically. Think in terms of correlations and connections, not absolutes. I think correlations and connections is a good way of thinking about it. Okay. If you like doing mind maps, where you do like you get that software with like the bubbles in, and you can connect it all together. Things like that, or do it on paper are good ways of doing it. Surprise the audience, do the unexpected. One thing here that I think is really, really good to do is some of these tricks are really, really simple, but they can be really effective. One is if you think about a shot or a way of doing a scene, is just think, what would the opposite look like? Just literally think what the opposite looked like, and you could be surprised at how well that can do. There was a scene in The White Lotus, the TV series, where like people went away to a posh resort. In the first season, there's a young character, and she was married to this guy who was from a well-off family, but had this simmering violence under the surface. He was a very, very kind of dodgy character. Now, when they had a confrontation scene, they got quieter and quieter, and it drew you in. Whereas the obvious thing to do would be to do a big kind of EastEnders explosion of emotion and stuff like that. But they went quieter and quieter, and it pulled you in because it was doing the opposite, but you're leaning in, wanting to see what's going on. And so things like that, thinking about doing the opposite of what would be the obvious thing to do. Midsummer did that. So Midsummer, it's a horror film in daylight. The whole film's in daylight. So it's a different way of doing things, doing the opposite to what people think. Avoid confusion. Your poetic language must be coherent without being obvious. Now, the way I think about this is what you're doing is you're creating a structure under the surface, and people get a sense of that structure. They don't necessarily know what that structure is, but they can feel it, okay? You're building that structure for your visual language. It doesn't even matter what that structure is. So I like things like biblical imagery through to, or mythology through to the tarot and stuff like that. It doesn't mean to say I believe in the tarot or believe in the Bible, but I like the structure. And the structure, that structure that creates a sense of cohesion that communicates. Does that make sense? And also, both of those areas and other areas we talk about are very rich in symbolism because they're very allegorical and metaphorical as well. Okay. So this comes from graphic design, basically. Anyone who's done graphic design, these are general graphic design elements and rules. Now, they don't often get applied to films, but if you have some knowledge of this, then this will really, really help you as a filmmaker. The other thing to bear in mind as well is when we get into this section, it can seem a bit like overwhelming. How am I going to do all this? Am I going to worry about the space and the line and color and tone and movement and all of these things? If you can take a handful of these things and apply them in your films in different shots, it's still going to help. Okay, take what you can and use it when you can. So space. So think about the space. How are you using the space? We'll get on to talking more about space when we get on to camera later on as well. But these are suggestions at the top. They're not absolutes, but it's to give you an idea of the kind of poetic psychological language you can use. So wide spaces can alienate characters, okay, because they're literally alone in the spaces. And tight spaces can externalize internal pressures. So there's a guy there running down an alleyway. That could be two things. That could be someone literally in terms of the plot trying to get away from someone and not being able to do it. But what would be even stronger is if they are also trying to run away from something they can't face in themselves at the same time. So it's working both on the level of plot and working underneath the level of their own character journey as well. Does that make sense? So this is the way you do that. So that's, you know, what we're seeing on screen is an externalization of those internal elements as well. Frame within a frame. So line, how to use lines. So you can use literal lines on screen. Here we have some examples here. How does that make you feel on the left when we see this character? What do we think about this character? How is he feeling? Trapped? Exactly.
He's stalking.
Stalking?
Yeah.
Yeah, he could be stalking because of the way his body language is. Yeah, he could be, you know, both of these could be correct. What makes them correct is how you use them in conjunction with other elements and the repetition that I went back to before. And then closure on the sense here. Now, the one on the right, how do we feel about the relationship between the characters there? Pressure? Okay.
Not hostile.
Hostile? Do they know each other?
Yes, direct.
Sorry?
There's that directness of like them.
Yeah, there's a directness to them. Who has the most power in that situation?
Woman.
The woman?
That's the one in the middle.
Yeah, because he's making the decision of not paying
Okay.
attention. He's making.
Feels like he's caught in literally in the middle.
Good, yeah, literally.
That he might be responsible for.
Yeah.
It's difficult to do these from individual frames, but the thing is I mean, these are all kind of like useful. You could build into your language. What I'm trying to get across here with line is it doesn't have to be literal lines. It can literally be like a line that we are sensing between these three. They're all on the same plane here where their eye levels are. Now, it could be the case that means that they're all balanced, or it could be they're not, because there are other elements at play as well here. Like he's facing forwards, they're on either side. He's almost like a referee, isn't he, in a sense? But what will determine that will be the other elements within this scene and around this that dictate that. But how you set up this individual shot is going to be conveyed by, okay, well, in this scene, this is what's going on under the surface. So this is how I'm going to set it up. Does that make sense? So it's thinking about lines as, you know, not just literal lines of objects on screen, but also lines between how people are looking and how things are placed. You know, there's like invisible lines, and we'll get on to a similar thing in a minute. Contrast. Anyone know what film that image was inspired by? Okay, so how does that make you feel, the image on the left there? How does that shape make us feel? What does that object make it feel like? Does it feel safe? Sorry?
Loneliness, because it's
Loneliness? Aggressive? All of those are good. Now, contrast is the word. Contrast and affinity are really, really important concepts, if you can get those. Contrasts are where things are, you're showing a strong difference between things, and affinity is where you're showing a cohesion between things. What's the contrast in this here? The angles? Exactly, exactly, exactly. It's contrasting with the environment that it's in. We got these soft shapes here, and if you actually look at the actual image from Midjourney, it's all Midsummer. You are looking at the image from Midjourney. So there are like all these soft shapes here, but then you have these strong shapes, and the diagonals are the most energetic shape. In terms of lines, your diagonals are the strongest lines in a sense. Okay, horizontals are the softest, verticals, diagonals. That's the usual rules you go along. It's a pointed shape, and it's contrast. It's anything else it's contrasting there with, as well as the environment. Colour.
It contrasts what you expect to see in that environment,
Yeah.
temp-wise.
Yeah.
It strikes me if that temp was just a little flatter, that it would be a lot less threatening.
Yeah. Anything else from it? Just step back a little bit more. Anything else you're thinking about how that shape might feel a bit jarring?
Like arrow.
Sorry?
Like an arrow, because
Well, it is like an arrow, yeah. I mean, you could even think of the path as like the stem of the arrow. That's another way. But the other thing that people forget about, and we will talk about this later with camera, is the frame itself. Okay? When you got that shape within a rectangle, there's a conflict between the two, isn't it? It feels a bit uncomfortable within the frame. Do you see what I mean? So always one thing people forget about is the frame, and we'll talk about frame later on as well, because it can be a really useful tool. You know, the literal edges of your frame. Now, affinity, this one on the right here, how does this make us feel?
I think included also as a viewer. You feel like this empty space is there for you to.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's a circle, isn't it? And again, it's that thing where it's not a literal shape on screen. We can do it through the placement of people and objects. But there's a space here that kind of makes us feel included. Anything else about it that's making us feel included? Cool.
We have a seat there in the middle.
We have a space there.
Yeah, it's for us.
Yeah. Here's what I'm thinking. So if we had exactly the same shot with everyone in the same position, but we were further back, so we could see the edges of it, would it make it feel different?
Yeah, it's like we would feel on the outside of the inner
Yeah.
circle.
So the edge of the frame here, cutting it off, is already including us in the circle. Does that make sense? So it's little things like that, and so it's really attention to detail stuff, but it does have a different psychological effect on you. So colour's a massive subject. At some point, I'll go into colour in more detail, I think, because it's just such a huge thing to cover. But colour can be used thematically. So in terms of here, we talk about artificiality. Obviously, it's interesting where these films come from. Emotion. So you're literally using colour to convey emotion there as well. Contrast. So this is showing us difference between a character and other characters in the environment. So here we got a character in red, and then our other characters are in, they're in shadow watching this character. One, it's drawing our eye straight to that character. Secondly, it's isolating that character from everyone else there. And thirdly, the way the shot is positioned is we're with them, aren't we? We're with them, basically, in the shadows watching this person. It's drawing our eye to them. And then affinity again. So that one was contrast and then affinity. So if you're using colour, so the way these guys here are all kind of wearing the same kind of clothing here, but also the way the shot is graded and treated, there's a unity to it, okay? And there's a kind of consistency to those characters, and we get a sense of unity across them. Does that make sense? It's also in the way, actually, when we get onto lines later on, there's a horizontalness, there's a sort of verticality to their lines. There's a sense of solidarity to them all because they're all kind of in line together. Okay, tone. People get confused with what tone is. You can have tone isn't everything up here, okay? Contrast, strong contrast in your tone would be elements that are down here and up there. There's a wide difference between your blacks and your whites in your shots. Literally, that's what tone is the brightness value of your shots from black to white at the end. if you've got strong contrast, they're going to be at the extremes of that. So if you see this image here, we've got lots of blown out whites with those strong dark shadows there as well. There's a contrast there. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel what temperature would you put that at? Cold. Yeah. Okay. And so by extension, what do we feel about the character? Lonely. Isolated. Sad. Yeah, could be that. They could be cold-hearted as well. Do you know what I mean? It's all of those things. It's your choice how you do it, but it's the language that's communicating it. Now, affinity, the other way you can go with tone is rather than showing the extremes, you can have things that are close to each other. So in terms of those tonal values, your highest point and your lowest point are closer to each other. It doesn't mean they're all up here, which is what people can tend to think. They could be right down here. Okay? What just means that they are closer to each other. So in this shot here, which is sort of, you can almost see it's a bit more washed out, the dark tones here are closer to here. Okay, and how does that make us feel? Happy? Warm? Sorry?
Delirious? A little bit like delirious.
Delirious, yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So all of these, like I said, like there's no right or wrong, but there's an absolute difference in them. Do you see what I mean? And these are all ways of you using this to build your language for your film. And the way you define that language through the repetition. Okay? You're going and you're connecting it to dramatic events. So if you connect this to a dramatic event where this character has been out on pills all night, you're going to create your delirium, okay? And you're reinforcing that message. But if you're doing it in a sense that they've just basically been to see their therapist and they've had a breakthrough and you're kind of consistently doing that, every time you then show this kind of lighting, you're reinforcing that kind of message that, okay, I'm just going to use this lighting when it feels like this character is connected to themselves again. Does that make sense? And that then becomes your language for your film. And again with this one, it's like, okay, I want to show this character just in terms of having extreme contrast in the tone, all the way through until one moment when maybe they have a breakthrough, and then I show them with this. And then that can then kind of really reinforce that change in that character. Does that make sense? Camera movement. Now there's two. I'm going to do another module on moving camera as well, because again, it's a massive thing. But there are two types of movement. There's camera movement, and then there's movement within the frame. So camera movement, again, lots to explain on that, and I'm not going to go into massive details on that because there's just too much to cover, and I will do that down the line. But there's also movement within the frame which gets forgotten about. Okay, so you can have a locked off frame and have an element within that frame creating a lot of movement that can be very, very energetic. Okay, going back to David Lynch, he talked about in one interview about filmmaking and the different, what he saw as different levels of energy of elements on screen. So he said like an empty room is a 2. So you've got a scale of 1 to 10. An empty room is a 2. You put a person in it, it's a 7. You put a fire in it, it's like a 10. So he's talking about a different kind of energetic level to these visual elements within. He's just talking very abstractly, but these are really useful tools. So if you look at this character here moving about a lot, and the design of this here, it's very, very busy. Our energy level is very, very high there, isn't it? And it's going to be uncomfortable to watch as a viewer because there's a lot of intensity there. But you can still do that with no camera movement at all, or not much editing. So the trick is to think about these things and not fall on the cliches of like, okay, I've got to have lots of fast camera movements with no one quite knowing what's going on, and that just irritates the audience. You can do it other ways, basically. Rhythm. Now, we're not talking about music here, we're talking about visual rhythm. Okay, so visual rhythm is the amount of repetition within the frame visually. Okay, so here we've got these lines here, which is a visual, there's a rhythm to it. You see? If they were closer together and smaller, the rhythm would be faster. This one here is irregular because people are moving in all different directions. There's a rhythm there, but it's chaotic. Does that make sense? So if you've got a crowd shot, okay, how are we having people moving? If you want to show that everything's gone to pieces, like psychologically or thematically within the film, have everyone running in different directions. If we want to show an uncontrolled mass, but that has like a kind of scary intensity and direction to it, push them all in one direction. You know, that, you look at any of those Riefenstahl films from the Second World War, it was like the Nazi filmmaker, and you see Triumph of the Will, where it's terrifying. Because, but it's the orchestration of these people in space that's a way that can be used to show power, which was what that was all about. You know, we can use that as filmmakers. Jodie Foster was going to make a biopic of her and wanted to play her at one point. I don't know why that. I mean, it's obviously contentious as a subject matter, but it's the interesting thing there is how do you balance someone who's a good filmmaker versus like terrible subject matter, isn't it? It's really interesting. Practical applications. Cinematography, art direction, production design, costume, hair and makeup. So we got our abstract ideas there. We got our graphic rules. How do we get them across? Okay, so these are the areas you're looking to get them across. So costume. What does costume say about character? So these are from three different. They're not from the films, but they're representative of three different films. This is the game I'm playing. What I want to talk about there is that, you know, when we see character in costume, we make very, very quick judgments on our character. And I'll talk to you later about shot size, and it's like psychosocial space. So if we're here, we feel like we're personal space or intimate space. We're intimate here, but personal here. If we go down to about waist height, then it feels like what's kind of like the social zone. Because when we meet people, when I meet you and I don't know you, we keep a certain degree of body distance between us. And so then there's also a sense that I can, just like, I think of it as a work context. So you kind of like see how someone's dressed, what they're wearing, you get a sense of how they're holding themselves socially. And costume says a lot about that. So when you're looking at costume, we're making our snap judgments about people, and the audience is doing that as well. Now you can work with that or you can go against it. So the frame on the left, the film that frame is inspired by is Moonlight again. Who's seen Moonlight? And this is from the last scene. What happens in that last scene? Yeah, he does. So our assumption when we see him, I mean, it's part of what the film is about, you know, this is his armor that he wears, isn't it? But we also, as an audience, we have our own prejudices and expectations when we see those kind of characters. It's so cleverly done that he's basically deconstructs himself. He takes off his grill at one point, which is a great way of him literally deconstructing himself as a character on camera at the same time. The one on the bottom was inspired by Wild at Heart, I think was where the idea came from. But it's the idea of like individuality. You want to kind of create quirky characters, and you're going to show them as slightly different. On the right there, how do we feel about those two characters? What's their relationship?
It's quite frosty.
What's their power? One way to think about costume, though, is their social relationship between each other. So what would you say their social relationship is?
One's maybe the underling and the main of the other, who's more the mistress of the house.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think, which one's the mistress? Left. Okay. How do you think what do you think the nature of the mistress is? Do you think her character? How do you think she is as a person?
She's quite stern.
Mm-hmm.
Repressed.
Repressed. Great. Yeah.
Maybe very wound up type.
Wound up type. Yeah.
She could snap at any moment.
Yeah. And how is the maid in relation to that?
It's like she's waiting for it.
But do you, as a person?
Protecting herself.
But as a person, how do you feel that she is?
From a costume side, she's less put together. She's clearly, not got everything together in the same way.
If this one is repressed and uptight, how are we feeling about the maid? Do you think she's repressed and uptight?
No, she has to be able to move and work and everything, so her clothing is a bit looser, the corset isn't
She has
restricted.
more open body language.
You're all right, because basically, I think that's it, is that she is repressed and uptight, even though she's in charge. But this one is softer and feels more, there's a sense of warmth and a sense that she's a bit less kind of neurotic in a sense. But it also works on two levels, like you say, because there is a practical connotation to it in terms of the story, but it also represents something about their character. And that creates a real richness there, because where's the power? Who has the power? She has the literal power, but maybe she has the emotional power because she's kind of more together. That creates depth. That creates meaning and depth for you there that you can play with as a director. Does that make sense? Cool. Makeup. Again, you can use makeup in different ways to communicate, and special effects makeup is a way to think about it as well. Just try to think about how you can use that makeup, not just to signify like an event in the action, but also to sort of convey, you're basically putting the interior on the exterior. Or if you're in a case of playing around with makeup like this, is there something else you're doing? This was like, there's a film called The Love Witch, which I was thinking of, which is basically where the director, Anna Biller, was like, was playing with those old film tropes and then kind of subverting them through what she was doing. You know, I think the use of makeup and is a really, really interesting thing to explore, particularly in terms of female-led protagonists, because it's such a strong thing in culture. You know, I think that you can play with that smartly, I think, and it is being done smartly. I think is a really good way of dealing with it. Theme in visual subtext. Theme and symbolism. A symbol is an object, character, figure, action, or colour that represents abstract ideas or concepts beyond its literal meaning. So there's a bit of repetition here, but just to kind of reinforce the theme. We're talking poetry. We're talking thinking poetically, not this equals that. Symbols enrich the narrative by adding layers of meaning, helping to convey complex themes and emotions subtly and powerfully. Some simple examples. Now, these are my simple examples. You want to go beyond these, okay? A rose symbolising love or beauty. The idea is just to kind of go, oh yeah, I get that. Characters, a hero representing bravery or integrity. Figure, a spiral as a symbol of psychological descent. So you can literally use like a graphical element and repeat that. In fact, there is a Japanese film called Spiral that was based on a manga, on a comic series called Spiral. I think they were redoing. Colours, red symbolising passion or danger. Actions, a handshake symbolising agreement or friendship. So this is touching on what I want to go into when I talk about directing actors further down the line at another point, is actually using what Chekhov would call psychological gestures. But I want to take it slightly more than that as a director, is thinking about, well, how you can create meaning through gesture. There's a guy called Laban who does stuff on movement and for interpretive dance. And I think elements like that could be brought in for thinking about how can performance, how does someone move across a room? All that can communicate meaning, you know. And that's something you can really work with your actors with as well. So here are some examples. Parasite. So in Parasite, spatial levels directly relate to class and hierarchy in Parasite. Now, he's not saying one thing. It could have been done. Who liked Parasite? Who's seen Parasite? Yeah. Great film. What's interesting about it is, whose side is he on? He's letting us make that decision, isn't he? That's what stops it being a lecture, and that's what makes it a good film. Because even if you agree with someone who's lecturing you, at that point you stop thinking, okay, yeah, great, I agree with you. Whereas this keeps us engaged. And so he's talking about levels. And it's levels within the house, levels within the town. And that ties into the actual structure, the society. You know, it's talking about career and those, you know, literally people with more money live higher up than people without. And that goes across the board. It's not just career. So it's really clever what he's doing, and it's why it wins Oscars. The Godfather, this is one some people may know. Oranges symbolise death. So every time there's a death scene in the Godfather, there's a scene with some oranges in beforehand. Orange and black relate to Sicily for Coppola, which is known for oranges and for death. So he just goes, okay, what's Sicily known for? Oranges and death. I'm going to link those two. And the whole colour system throughout is orange and black. That's what it is. So windows and doorways. So they symbolise the transition between the domestic and the criminal underworld. I think doorways are a really interesting way of using your frame. It's called frame within a frame, basically. So, and I think I'll talk about this later on. So you're creating another frame here. You're separating characters. But what you can also do is not just separate your characters, but you have two planes you can show at once. So there's a domestic sphere here and a kind of underworld sphere here, and you're putting that contrast in there. Okay, it's making it visually interesting, rich frame. And it also symbolises entrapment. So like Michael doesn't want to do what he's doing; he's trapped. Eyes. Now, Blade Runner is a good use of eyes. Humanity versus non-humanity. It's literally a plot device as well. It's how to tell if someone's a replicant or not. but it's used consistently throughout. And the eyes are seen as the windows to the soul. Now, there's a guy, Rupert Sheldrake, an alternative scientist, I suppose. He was trained at Cambridge, but he's a very smart guy, sees things differently. But one thing he's kind of been going on about recently is this idea that the eye also transmits as well as receives. But a lot of people instinctively feel that. Like the experiments he does is looking at the back of someone's head and whether people feel they're being looked at. Now, whether that's true or not is not really of interest to me. But what's interesting to me is how we feel that it's true. And it's something you can use as a storyteller. You know, how the eye can transmit. When you go into things like, when I talk slightly about the idea of the male gaze later on, the idea of looking has a position of power about that. Okay, and that's something that you can use as well in your storytelling. So it's the idea of the eyes as two-way mirror. You know, it goes one. You know, we look out of them, but we also there's a vulnerability when people are looking into our eyes. You know, I'm not great on eye contact. You know what I mean? So, but it's as most people are. Okay, sources of subtext. Art history. Now, if you're a filmmaker, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm teaching younger students, they tend to sort of just look at films as their references. Their references are films, because filmmakers are film obsessives, so we watch lots of films. But if you only use films as your references, you can end up being like photocopies, and photocopies lose value, okay? All those people you think of as great filmmakers and they've got these amazing shots, often you'll find that their shots are coming from other sources, and a lot of them are coming from the art world. So here's some 3 examples here that I just pulled off from online. The Boating Party, Repentant Magdalene, and Watson and the Shark. Now, I think these are all really interesting images that you can look at for elements such as composition, use of colour, how those things are, you know, how those things are communicating to us. Cinema's only been around like 150 odd years, well, close to 150 years, but art has been around for centuries. Okay, so that idea of telling psychological stories through art is right there in galleries, and you can go there and sort of use that. And look at things like lighting. You know, if you want to get a good understanding of lighting, look at Caravaggio or look at Rembrandt. You know, incredible use of lighting in painting that you can use in your artwork. One little trick you can do is if you wanted to recreate some lighting that's in a classical painting, what you can do is to get an image of it and desaturate it. Okay, so take the colour out, and then all you're looking at is the tone. So you're looking at just the shadow and the light, and that can help you try to work out where you can put the lights to recreate that. Okay. So these are 2 really, really interesting pictures as well that there's a couple of video essays online about these. So this is Stanzik is what it's called. If I've probably brutally murdered that title there. But the idea is we got this character here, and then there's this other thing going on in the background here, and it's to do with post-Russian invasion. Historically, there's a historical reason that the artist was commenting on here, and the idea of a jester or a clown turning away from the party and being, you know, despondent is again, it's that contrast. We're taking something we would expect to be one thing and then making it something else. Now, the other one on the right by Velázquez is really interesting from the point of view of the look, because there are people looking at us in the frame. There is also someone looking at us in the doorway. There is also a reflection in here of people who are looking, who I think the argument was that they were actually the people who commissioned the painting. So there's all these exchanges of people looking in different directions, and that makes it really rich and interesting to look at. Now, you could make an entire film based on that painting. You know, these are sources that you can go to find your ideas. So once you've got your themes and your ideas, go and visit a gallery, go and look around, see what inspires you and see what stands out. You don't have to make things, it doesn't matter what the connections are. You're looking to try to see what pings in your mind to sort of go, oh, well, that could be handy for that. Here's an example. Francis Bacon is used a lot for filmmaking. This is one of his portraits here, 3 Studies of George Dyer, who was one of his main lover, actually, who actually eventually committed suicide. Very problematic relationship. He was actually a burglar who broke into Francis Bacon's house. That's how it sort of started. So, yeah, very interesting. They made a film based on it, which was Love is the Devil, which is a really good film. They couldn't actually show any pictures from Francis Bacon, but what they did was they used very slow shutter speed to create this blurring of the faces and that. So they used that. And it was also based around a place called the Colony Club. It was like where drunks went, basically. And they kind of used it to show when people were drunk and slurring, all the rest of it. Okay. It's a good film. But it was used by Nolan for his inspiration for the makeup for the Joker, basically. That's what he did. So again, you look at the Joker, you think that's really iconic, but it's still coming from another source. You know, everything comes from somewhere else. And as he says, I look to art to teach me how to express what I can't simply say through dialogue. The Joker, he did such a good job with this character because there's no backstory. He keeps changing the backstory. And it's that fact that we can never understand who that character is that makes him more and more compelling, because he's giving the audience questions. He's not giving us answers. Okay, so here's a shot on the left from Wes Anderson. Here's a very clear inspiration to Prince Edward Island by Colville. Do you see what I mean? So it's all about the framing. And it's also, there's not just the framing. He's not just going, that's a nice picture, I want to emulate that picture. What he's doing is he's going, there's a certain nostalgia to looking at those pictures in the past. There's a sense of cleanness and uniformity to it, and I want to reinvestigate that. For Moonrise Kingdom is kind of a very nostalgic film. So he looks not just at Colville, he looks at Norman Rockwell as well. Norman Rockwell is like, you know, Mr. kind of American nostalgia for the 50s. Do you know? So you're looking at the loaded symbolism that these pieces, these cultural artifacts have, and then reusing it for yourself as a kind of shorthand. Another place you can look for sources is literature, classic literature, so Shakespeare is an obvious one you can go to. I'm a massive fan of folk tales and folklore. I love it. I'm a big fan of psychoanalysis and things like that, and reading of these things, because it gives you richness that you can go to. Doesn't matter to me whether psychoanalysis is actually scientifically usable or workable. It's just another deeper level of structure that you can use within your work. That's what you do. And if you look at everything from like the Brothers Grimm, but also look at the artistic representation. So this is Doré. If you look back at those early illustrations, they're uncanny and they're macabre. There's loads of readings you can put into that image on its own. Do you see what I mean? If you look at, if you want a great example of that kind of investigation, the one to look at is Company of Wolves, Neil Jordan in the 80s, which was written by Angela Carter based on the short stories she did about a young girl's coming of age. Very, very heavy on the symbolism. She had an issue with the ending, interestingly enough, because it was kind of all very dreamlike, and he went one way with the ending and she wanted it to be another way, which is very interesting in itself, but a different discussion. Again, spirituality, so religious mythology. The reason for religious mythology and elements like that is because it's all allegorical, okay? Unless some people, I suppose, do take these things literally, but it's all symbolic, it's poetic. It's about things that we cannot discuss in normal terms. That's literally what it is. So it's a good place to look for symbolism, because that's what you're doing. Religious themes of good versus evil, fall of man, death and rebirth. All these themes are built into this stuff. It's used all the time, and you can reuse it. Mystic symbolism. So tarot cards is a great place to go for that, for example. I don't know how useful astrology might be, but there is also things like the yin-yang, the balance between light and dark forces is a really good way to go and to look into things as well. You could do anything. You could look into the mythical figures in Buddhism, for example. They've got some really kind of destructive energetic forces, and these things are representative of energies. So these are all things that you can look at as well. Psychoanalysis, which is one that I am a fan of. So you have the obvious things like the Oedipus complex and things like that. You also have Jungian stuff. Now, a lot of this stuff, if you're going to look into it, try to look into, if not the original source material, then ones that are academic rather than the off-the-shelf popular breakdowns of these, because often they get it wrong or they simplify it beyond belief, okay? And what you're going to get by looking at these things in a rich, chewy text is you're not looking to become a psychoanalyst. You're looking to sort of find something that makes you go, oh, that's interesting. That can give me something I can explore there in character. So I've just done a short recently called Foreclosure, and there's an idea called Foreclosure in Lacan psychoanalysis, which is basically, it's where elements are completely outside the psyche. So if you see like the psyche as a net, like an interconnecting net, it's like someone has holes in that net. It's not neurosis where they can be mended. It's like they're literally, in terms of their own identity, there are these holes in their identity. So I'm trying to use that in the film where there's these things are happening that are just seem to be kind of suddenly invading this guy's space where he can't accept what he's done. So these are ways I can take these ideas and go, oh, that's interesting, I'll play with that.
They get stuck in the net, or do they go through the holes?
But it's up to me as a film, as you know, it's up to you as a filmmaker, because it doesn't matter what you do with it. It's just a structure that you're using. And the other thing I would say is that I get a lot of pleasure out of kind of coming up with those ideas and sort of working on those sort of things, put them into film. Maybe people are watching, no, hardly anyone's going to get that because they're not going to know the references I'm talking about. But they'll pick up on a sense of consistency and a sense that there's a coherent structure underneath it. And that's what I think is the bit that's the interesting bit. People pick up on a sense of, with pattern finding creatures. They find a pattern and they go, oh, there's a pattern here, I want to investigate that. They may not find your pattern, they're bringing their own stuff to it. They'll find their own stuff. But they'll notice a pattern and they'll start putting stuff on it, and that's fine. So politics, and by this I'm not talking about the subject, but you can do. Of course you can make films about political subjects, but it's also about the theme. So the politics could be under the surface, and often is. So here I've got, it could be everything from zombies to body snatcher stuff. I'm actually doing something on body snatchers, would be for a feature I want to do. And then there is references to feminism and gender. So we think about something like Thelma and Louise. As the characters go through the film, they drop off elements of their costume that are, coded as feminine and adopt male aspects of the costume. So they wear like a trucker's hat and stuff like that. And it's all about this story, this transformation. It's how you use those elements to kind of convey these things across time. Even big sort of superhero things like the X-Men series was all about basically minorities. That's what it was effectively about. It was literally, that's how they got Ian McKellen on board, so there we go. Is to be restrictive in your language. So it's a light touch, particularly with a short film, is you don't want to overload it because it's repetition. So you need to repeat things so that people pick up on it as a language. So you don't want to have loads of different symbolic. It's something I've struggled with. It's like I'll get ping, ping, ping with idea and I want to bung it all in, but it's too much. So you need to sort of strip it back and just restrict yourself. I'm going to use these 2 or 3 elements that I'm going to use repeated throughout this. And it should always go back. Don't forget the drama. You've got to go back to the script, say, what's the script about here? And always connect it to that as well. But the way you do it is on passes. So you'll do one pass that would be looking at, what's the human story here, what's the character story, and you do that. And then you'll do another pass that then would be looking at the subtext in terms of how you can convey that through your film. So you do it in passes. Often what happens is, previous students I've experienced this with, is they will take a script, they will break down their shots, and they think they're done. It's like, no, it's like, you wouldn't write an essay or a story and just write it once and go, right, it's written. So why would you do that when you're working on your shots for your film? But people do. They kind of go, it's hard work drawing images, I'm going to do it once and that's it. It's an iterative process. You repeatedly do it. And some of that will be kind of overdoing it and then taking things away again and stripping it back again. You can feel it when it gets to it, and it happens as well when you're writing, there becomes a sense of efficiency to it. It gets to a point of like, oh, there's an elegance to that. By stripping out those things, it kind of goes click, and it goes, oh, okay, I can stick just to those, and that kind of conveys it. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a case of like, once you've gone through your process and, then to do a pass of literally just going, what can I take out without it falling apart? That's a really good point. In fact, you will find that as a director, you will have to do that for pragmatic reasons. It's like, you write the most amazing script in the world. It's like fantastic. Then you actually got to go to the point of actually making it, and you go, oh, I've only got 3 days to make this, and I haven't got the money to sort of cover another day. So what is the minimum I can do to convey this story? And you'll go through, and it's a pragmatic pass. You'll go through and go, what can I get rid of here for time just so I can get this film made? And that can be actually really, really helpful because you're really stripping it down to the bones then, And I think again with symbolism and things like this, is you will be doing that. But what I'm trying to talk about in this afternoon, we'll get on to as well, is we're not just talking about costume, we're not talking about props, we're not talking about heavy dream sequences and stuff like that. I'm talking about why you make a decision to shoot something in a close-up rather than just a wide shot. You know, that is part of your visual language as well, and that's something that we're discussing.